I've been asked to talk about tables and figures, which is, I think, a nice way of leading on from what Hannah mentioned in terms of an overall structure for a paper. And these are, again, things that I've learned over time, iteratively through failure and some success, and stuff that you read about as well. And oftentimes as feedback from more experienced authors who've been successful, which is probably one of the most important things. I'm going to try to do this in about 10 minutes, so we'll have more time at the end of our session for questions. So what I thought I'd do is actually try to focus down on, I think, 8 things that I think are important for tables and figures, at least things that I've reflected on. So the first is sort of timing when you actually prepare these, and general approaches. And actually much in line with what Hannah said, in my own practice, I do tables and figures first. It's often a great way to synthesize what you found, reflect on what the results really show. Sometimes I do this after the methods, but in truth, I'd say in about 90% of the time, this is what I start off with first. As you're preparing a paper, it's worthwhile, especially if you have a target journal, to think about referring at least to the instructions of authors for that particular paper, because you need to get a sense of what the maximum number of tables and figures for that paper might be. And whether there's some important formatting requirements that vary across these. For example, some of them have ways that they want footnotes denoted, the way certain statistics such as p-values, or even how standard deviations are represented, let's say for continuous variables, how they should be. And it's good to sort of get that taken care of right away. So I often do that at first, because I kind of then know, okay, if I have 5 tables and figures, I'm going to have to really think about what are the key things I need to get into the main paper. If you've done, especially a randomized controlled trial, or you've published a protocol or developed a protocol for your observational study, you may have some pre-specified tables and analyses that you've stipulated there. So really go back to that, because if there are things that you said you're going to report, make sure you report it in the paper's tables and figures as well. And then from a strategic perspective, just as you sort of think about organizing a paper, it's really important to think about how you want to organize the tables and figures in that. And I'll get to that in the next slide, specifically about which ones that you want to include in the main paper versus the ones that you might push onto a supplement. And importantly, tables and figures replace text. So when you're writing, and this is a real pet peeve of mine, if you report a whole bunch of data in a table, don't now use 150 words of text in your results to basically say the same thing over and over. And people do this. Part of this, you may want to comment on some of the results of the tables in the text, but really it should be a broad overview as opposed to repeating the same information. Let's see here. So online supplements are something that I use a lot myself, and because one of the reasons is that you often have a lot more results and data that you can actually, that fit in more than the often 5 or 6 tables and figures you're allowed to present in a paper. So what I often do is try to think about the tables I prepared and ask myself, which ones are the critical ones for the key messages that you want in your main paper? And which are the bonus things, the things that might be additional details that reviewers or readers might be interested in, but ones where really you could read the whole paper without having to refer to that. And this is a really useful tool to actually prepare an online supplement and keep some of that other information. And you know, this was a survey published in BMJ Open about 2018 of about almost 3,000. Sorry, could somebody? Okay, is that muted? Okay. And what it showed was it just sort of gave people's sort of reviewers, editors, as well as readers' perceptions of online supplements. And one of the things certainly readers and reviewers pointed out was that they actually valued, and reviewers are the key things here, the use of online supplements where necessary to present tables or figures. So do think about that. So if there are 10 things that you really want to present in tables and figures and you can't fit them all in, do think about using a supplement as a way of getting that fitted in efficiently. This is an interesting aside about this. This was a paper published, a research letter published in JAMA, which actually looked at papers submitted to the JAMA journals, and they actually compared papers that had online supplements versus those that didn't. And interestingly, papers that had online supplements were more likely to be peer reviewed and accepted. That doesn't mean you should fill your papers with supplements that are unnecessary, but it certainly says that supplements may be useful with respect to providing extra information to reviewers especially. And in this case, about a third of all reviewers did comment on the supplement in their review of those journals, of those manuscripts you reviewed. So when you prepare tables, they're basically a whole bunch of numbers. And if you approach your you're reporting in tables in terms of looking at the output from SAS or Stata or R and transcribing those numbers to a table. I can tell you that is a very error-prone process. And it's very embarrassing to actually have data errors pointed out by reviewers or co-authors. And so there are ways in most statistical packages now, and this is something you should probably discuss with your statistician or supervisor, to simply get the results exported directly from the statistical program to either Excel or Word. And these options exist in Stata, it exists in R, and I suspect it exists in SAS, I just don't use it anymore. This is an example of Stata's options for what they call reproducible or automated reporting, where if you conduct, let's say, a whole bunch of chi-square analyses and a frequency table analysis, they'll be able to output that to an Excel table or a Word table. And this is another option in R. Really do think about using that because it's going to help make things faster and, more importantly, reduce errors. So the audience for tables, when I think about them, is really the reviewers and the editors. So whatever format that you use for your tables, if your paper gets accepted at a journal, they're going to reformat it in a way probably much nicer that fits in to that particular journal. But you want to make it in a format in the submission version that makes life as easy as possible for reviewers and editors. So it's easy to interpret, and you want to get your messages across carefully. So aside from thinking about what's in them, consider very carefully what's a message that you want to get across with your tables. Like if this is a comparison of baseline characteristics, make sure that all the key things that you want to compare between groups are actually included in that table. And if, for example, you're comparing 4 groups, and you're, as opposed to sort of trying to pack all of these into a narrow portrait format table, I often use landscape formats when required. Think about being flexible in how you present that on a Word document, so it's easier for reviewers to read that. So in addition to thinking about what's in the tables, think a lot about formatting. And I've, over the years, got a lot more obsessive about this. Because the extent to which it makes it easier for reviewers to understand what's in your tables, the more likely is that they're not going to get annoyed, and for them to be able to interpret your study and hopefully have a more positive response to it. So in addition to simply the numbers, think carefully about the headings that you have for columns to ensure that they're accurate, that they're consistent across tables. So if you're talking about the intervention arm, make sure you describe it in the same way in all of the headings of all the tables. Make sure that you use titles to ensure that your readers understand what you're presenting in those tables, and make sure that you have enough spacing both within the rows so things aren't too packed in, and more importantly, and I still see this sometimes, if you're presenting 2 different data points, don't simply do a return and then present that information in 2 different lines within the same cell. Make sure that you use separate cells for every data point. So what do I mean by clarity of presentation? So, again, your reviewers are busy people. They've got a lot of other things. This is not the highest, reviewing your paper is not often the highest list of many things that's on their to-do list for that afternoon or morning. So the extent to which you make life easier for them, the more likely that they won't get annoyed at you, and therefore you have a more positive response to your paper. And so I'm using an example of a paper that one of my students is working on. And this is sort of the first version. So we are comparing characteristics between patients who did or did not have an outcome of interest, and we just wanted to compare the baseline characteristics. And I'm an anesthesiologist, and these are, of course, characteristics we often report in patients. So it contains all the information we want, but I think most of you agree this is not, it is a bit jarring, and everything's really packed in, and is often hard to discern exactly what rows fit in where. It's just not the most pleasant to actually view. So what do I do? This is how we reformatted it. And this is one example, but pick a style, learn from people who are your supervisors and more senior people, and do this because, what's simply required is sometimes actually spacing, some shading, making sure that the rows are separated, and using indenting when you need to. But I think most of you would agree, although the table on the left has the same information as the table on the right, that information is a lot easier for a reviewer to understand. And again, all of this will be reformatted when your paper gets accepted. All of this is to make sure that your reviewers understand what you're saying more easily. So figures are, of course, the other important component of a paper. And I often like this one quote about this from John Tukey, who's a statistician, as many of you know, which tells us that the figures are especially there to help us see patterns or trends that are not apparent by simply looking at the figure, at the numbers themselves. So it can often convey things that are just not apparent by listing a whole bunch of figures in a row or a table or a column on a table. The other thing to keep in mind is that each figure, just pragmatically speaking, takes up about 100 to 500 words of text space. So if what you're trying to convey with your figure could be said in 20 words, adding a figure, unless it's really, really important to convey the message, is probably not the most helpful use of a figure in that particular paper. Aside from developing the figure, make sure that you have titles, legends, that's something Hannah mentioned in her presentation earlier, and captions to make sure that readers actually understand what you're conveying in the figure. When we do a research study and we prepare figures, we often get somewhat of a tunnel vision where we implicitly understand what the figure is telling us. Make sure that your co-authors look at it. Somebody who's not even involved in the study. My wife is a clinician scientist. Sometimes I'd actually ask her to look at some of my figures and legends and ask, does this make sense to you? Because if it's not easy to understand based on the title and legends to another reader who has less content knowledge, it's probably telling you that it's going to be hard for reviewers and readers to understand what you're saying, and that you may need more explanatory information there. How do you prepare figures? There's a lot of different software available, and it really depends on what your own personal preferences are, but also that of your statistician or supervisor. R is a great statistical program for developing plots. I use that a reasonable bit, but it has a steep learning curve. Stata is actually not unreasonable, and it has some editable plots. And Excel, even for simple things such as bar charts, for example, or even some XY plots, is actually a pretty reasonable option for simple plots, and not something that should be discounted. I used to use SAS previously. Unless it's changed, I found the plots horrible, but maybe that's changed more recently. But do get familiar with some form of statistical program or plotting program, probably one or two, that you get familiar with, that you're going to use consistently for your papers. So how might figures actually be helpful? So when might you use a figure as opposed to a table? And I think it's particularly suited when what you're interested in doing is showing less the numeric values, but rather trends and relationships between information. And I'll give you two examples of where I think that using a figure can be helpful. And so one is from a paper that Brian Cuthbertson and I led. This was from the MET study. And in this particular, I'll give you an example of how. So our goal here, this was a study when we performed exercise testing in a whole bunch of patients awaiting surgery. And what we wanted to do was convey what the distributions of peak oxygen consumption or exercise performance within these four groups of patients were. So what you could do is actually simply get a table, create four columns for these groups, and then present the distributions of the peak oxygen consumption using medians and interquartile ranges or standard deviations. But you'll see in this case, using box plots, which I actually find to be quite useful for demonstrating distributions, you can see you can communicate the same information, but probably a lot more. You can get a sense from the figure that things do differ between the groups, but you also get a sense of the extent to which there's overlap between the groups and the range of distributions there. And that is more informative, certainly in my view, than simply putting numbers there. So whenever you have circumstances where that piece of information, that way of conveying the results and comparing results across groups can be done better graphically, do think about that. You can also do that over time. This is an example from a study that looked at, this is in the Journal of, American Journal of Epidemiology, which looked at, this was a study on infectious disease, looking at the presumed rate of beta-lactam resistance based on the type of antibiotic that children were receiving for upper ear infections. Middle ear infections. And what you can see here is you could have presented this information in terms of median values between these two groups, penicillins, azithromycin, antimicrobial class, or cephalosporins, simply using numbers. But I think most of us you would agree that by showing these box plots over time, you get a sense both of how values changed over time and how they differed between the groups. Now, admittedly, this is an example where I think there's an opportunity for using color to convey the differences between the groups much more effectively. But again, think about those opportunities where figures can be quite helpful for presenting information. And finally, maybe some pet peeves, which is things that over the years I've found don't work and I find aggravating, certainly when I review a paper. So one, and I think I mentioned this earlier, if there's a whole bunch of information in a table of means and mean values and standard deviations, there is no point in repeating the exact same information in the text of the results. It's not an efficient use of your word count. What you may want to comment on in the results, for example, might be a broad overview of, let's say, in general, demographics vary between groups, especially with respect to characteristics X, Y, and Z, but don't repeat the same numerical information. The other aspect is some figures simply aren't helpful. They look sometimes interesting, but if you actually look at what they convey, you'll get a sense of it, the fact that they don't really convey much additional information. I'll give you two examples of things that particularly aggravate me. So I do a reasonable bit of work on prediction rules, and people often develop prediction rules and try to show their predictive performance using an area under the ROC curve. And they like to produce these plots. And as all of us, most of you would know, the performance of a predictive tool is based on a higher area under that curve. But in almost all circumstances, presenting this curve doesn't really convey anything. What really matters is the area. And if you knew the area, seeing that actual curve there doesn't actually tell you anything different. The one exception might be, let's say, if you created a scale where there might be different cut points, where you may have a trade-off between sensitivity and specificity, that may be useful because then you'll be able to identify where that cut point might be best for that particular scale. But in most circumstances, if the idea is to compare 4 different groups with respect to their area under the ROC curve, adding this figure really doesn't add much, and that figure allowance in your paper is probably better dedicated to something else. The other thing which I think is rare, but it still appears on occasion in some journals, medical journals, but not the main ones, are pie charts. And pie charts are, frankly, I can think of very few circumstances where it's helpful. They really tell you about some counts and numbers that could be presented in a table. It's much harder to really visually get a sense of differences between proportions across those groups. And this kind of information, and this was in a medical journal, could be conveyed much more readily and probably more transparently using a table. So figures are useful, but do think about, A, is it necessary? Could it be used with text more efficiently? And really ask yourself, is this the best way of conveying information? Because in some cases it's very helpful and adds a lot to your paper, and in other circumstances it's frankly not worth the effort in adding it to the paper. And those are the 8 points I thought I'd convey. There's a lot more other things we could discuss after, but I'm sure we'll do that in the discussion after the session. Thank you.